talking about conditions for healing, it's like connection is the primary one. And so face to face, I think for me helps facilitate feeling like it's a conversation versus like a proclamation.
Totally. Yeah, I guess I feel that too for sure in conversations. I've wondered how it because it ends up coming across in an audio medium.
Hmm.
Sometimes I listen back and like something that was really vibrant visually is like, oh, there's just this sort of like lull in the audio, but whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll put these on YouTube or something one day too.
Yeah. Yeah. All good. Where are you? You're in Oregon, yeah?
Bellingham, Washington.
Oh, fun. You must
Yep.
be friends with my Christina Weinhold.
I think
You all seem like you would know each other.
is she like in her early 20s?
No.
Okay. Then I'm not sure.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm definitely meeting people here, especially more and more as the
Oh, did you just move there?
spring. I moved here in the fall, last
Oh,
fall.
okay.
So
Oh, so
yeah, when I met you, I had been here like 2 months.
oh, cool.
Yep.
How's it going there?
Boy, it's been a full life. I don't even know what the metaphor is. Something like
Yeah.
compost.
Oh, wow. Good for you. Whoa, going deep in the winter.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was a very deep winter.
Mhm.
Um, and it's been a deep shift. I mean, I'm starting to share this with more and more people. I'm having a baby. My
Oh,
partner's
yeah.
about halfway through her pregnancy, and that's been a huge
Awesome.
life reorientation.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah.
Well, congrats on that.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great. Orienting toward papahood
Mm-hmm.
or whatever.
Or whatever. Yeah. No, it feels like
Yeah,
papahood.
cool.
Yeah.
That seems real. That seems very right or something.
Yeah. I feel that too. In some
Yeah.
ways, like the crazy winter. I mean, as much as we can say those things are about anything, because who knows? But it was totally like tilling the soil for something new to come in without a lot of fuss and fight on my part. I was like, okay, whatever. Let's do it. Yeah.
So cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks, Sage.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome.
You're in your place in Maine?
Yeah, I practice out of here a little bit in Portland, Maine. Yep.
Yep. I see the corner of a trigger point map
Exactly.
in
Totally.
the camera. Oh,
Yep.
nice. Yep.
Hmm.
Yeah, I've got some Kate White's
I know, totally. It's like we're in the same
autonomic.
office, just on
Yeah.
different coasts.
Totally. Yeah.
Lovely. Yeah, yeah. I've been mostly on the road for the past bunch of months, but landing in New England this summer, which I'm so grateful for. Ready to be in one place a little bit
Mm.
more.
Mm-hmm. What have you? I'll also just say about 5 minutes ago, pretty early on, I hit the recording
Oh, great.
button,
Okay,
and I usually just start these whenever. I don't know if you've listened to the show at all, but I just like start wherever it makes sense to start.
great. Awesome.
Yeah,
Good to know.
yeah.
Good.
So, and I like that sort of blurry line between, well, when are we officially on? And
Yeah,
but
great.
anyway, anything you ever say that you're like, I don't want this being
Yeah,
on air, you just say the word.
awesome. Appreciate that.
Yeah. What were you doing on the road?
Yeah, so I did some workshops out in California with actually some folks who I met at the conference that we were at
Mm-hmm.
last fall. I guess it was it fall. It feels so, I have no idea when it was.
Mm-hmm.
So I worked with some of the California Institute for Integral Studies with the Somatic Psychology program, did some workshops there, which was great. And I'm on the road a lot with the Somatic Experiencing Institute, SE,
Mm-hmm.
as a teaching assistant, as an assistant, um, and for their training. So I was in Austin, and then I did a deepening therapeutic touch workshop up in Halifax, Canada,
Mm-hmm.
and then I was in Australia, New Zealand for somatic experiencing.
Wow.
So yeah,
So,
totally. It's been
yeah,
quite a couple months.
you're on a teaching tour.
Yeah, yeah, or a teaching assistant for sure. It's
Yeah.
been great it's so cool to hold space for folks who are at the edges of what we're exploring, body awake, really, right?
Yeah. I like I like that you tie that in totally.
Yeah.
And and what would I mean? There's so many ways to like sort of orient everybody, but I'm curious, if you just had a moment with somebody and they're like, what do you, well, I guess we have as many moments as you want. Yeah, what do you mean by that?
Hmm. Hmm. Well, it's changed and it hasn't changed over the years. I think I think so much of this comes out of my own personal history and my own personal framework, which I can talk a little bit about or not. But a real draw toward creating conditions for people and communities and myself to be able to come into a fuller sense of body. Um, and particularly that's connected to justice and liberation, right? That's connected to, it's not just like my personal feelings, but so much of what people go through that is creating trauma and struggle and suffering, and sadness and grief. So much is, created by the bigger context of, social inequality, economic issues. And so there's a way that being able to continue to explore how to bridge healing, which I think has, in the West and with white folks, we've sort of brought it into this like one-on-one model. And I've, been really working and exploring over the past, bunch of years. I started doing some healing work in 2006. Well, actually, really, I mean, earlier than that. Just I was doing
Mm-hmm.
collective work in '99 with the queer community. Just how do we create conditions for folks to feel safe, to feel safer, to feel freer, and to feel more choices in relationship and in workplace and in the world, in their body. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I could go on and on about all that, but I just feel kind of like I've been an explorer and an adventurer at times. As you know, it's like super harrowing because healing work, it's sort of like this word that's like healing, but I think, when you really get into some of the grit of it, it's often not, it's like, oh,
Ah!
it's like, oh God, why did I do this? Why am I just not getting that easy job? And not that there's really,
Sure.
but so I think, you know, I think talking more about the realities of it and trying to create some new ways of thinking about how we can invite more folks into a healing process that really represents their realities and is connected to their lineages. And, um, you know, I don't know, just I think we're all trying to do something different. And I think we all get to be a part of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Just one little quick thing before we go on to, is there a way you could move your collar so that the mic doesn't scritchy
Oh, yeah,
on it?
totally.
It's funny. It sounds so benign
Yeah, no,
on
no,
your
I
end,
get
but
it.
I've done enough where it's like, oh, it ends
Do
up being kind of intense.
you have like a suggestion to like button up more?
I don't know. Maybe I don't. I
Yeah,
don't have a
let's.
good suggestion. I mean, one
Oh,
thing, it's annoying, but you can go like this.
mm-hmm. Let's see if I can put something
We
here.
should have a little like stick
Mm.
that you can attach to your
It's hilarious.
the
Yeah,
anti-scritchy stick.
I think that might sort of do it. We'll see if I mean it's tricky because I'm like whoa, 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 whoa.
Yeah, totally. We want to be able to use our hands and stuff.
But how's that? Is that a little bit better?
Yes.
And I can put my collar in. That's
Oh,
probably
that's nice. Yes,
yeah.
I think we're off on a good start. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Um, yeah, gosh, I interviewed Peter Levine a couple months ago, and
Mm-hmm.
I know that
How's
was
that?
one of the. It was sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I just aired it a couple days ago. But one of the sort of emergent themes, well, and I referenced in the end how I'd asked the Vegas study group for suggestions, and that was, I mean, there were questions all over the map, but one that was emergent was, asking how this work, and it shows up in so many ways, right? My collective or my personal healing, how that either intersects or is just a hopelessly integral part of a collective. There's that beautiful quote, and maybe you know it. I feel like I saw it on your website once. I'd made a little note about it, but if you realize that my liberation is like hopelessly bound up in yours, then like, let's do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Then let's do this. Um, can I, and I know this is a theme we'll be orbiting around. One thing I really wanted to ask you about was the conversation you facilitated at that conference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'll set it up as I remember it. And I'll kind of set it up and, ask specific questions as needed, but I'd just love to hear from you. Because here's what I experienced.
Great.
That there was a really, so it's a panel, right? And the
Oh,
few
yeah.
of the head people are up answering questions. And one of the other head people, a woman of color, brings up a point of, and it went something to the effect of, I don't feel like my voice has really been a part of this in a way that I wish it was, and it gets quickly sort of brushed off by the panel of white men, and then it comes up, like somebody brings that up like 10 minutes later, and I think a lot of us in the room were sort of like, wow, that was kind of an intense transition. Somebody brings it up of like, hey, we'd like to bring, this point of view back into play. We want to bring that back into the court. And there's a lot of heat and a lot of tension in the room. And then eventually it gets dismissed. And then there's a lot of talking that night. And then the next morning you facilitated a group discussion with everybody, with like however many hundreds of people were there. And in a way that, and I'd seen you do this in your class too, but I was taken by the amount of charge in the room, at least what I felt. I remember explicitly thinking the thought of like, oh my God, I'm so glad I don't have to like stand up and try to make sense of this, because I would not, I can feel it now. Like I would feel just so nervous and like not know what to say. And I remember watching you and like, it was so, it was very beautiful. I was very taken by it. And what I experienced of you, clearly, I won't say clearly, my experience was you were also feeling a lot of charge in your body, and that somehow was like part of the facilitation, meaning you didn't like turn away from that. I think you even, like brought it in kind of lightheartedly about how you were feeling. And there was a lot of two sides, or whatever. I guess I shouldn't even say that, but it felt like the heat of conflict and opposition. And I saw you as a facilitator. And I guess, not to say you were the only one. Maybe we all are in our own way, but
So,
like
well, I
standing
just
in the
want,
middle.
yeah, and I just want to put a point of reference in here, just to add to it, is that
Please.
I was co-facilitating with Christine Gindi, who is a woman of color who has tons of background in facilitation and around cross-cultural race issues. So we were up there together holding space. So just to paint the picture as you sort of talk about your experience.
Thank you. Can I pause? Can we pause for a moment around
Yeah,
that?
sure.
It's funny. I often get a little nervous about doing this on air, but I feel like this kind of stuff's important. I've heard that before, and it's funny because when I look back, I only see you up there, and maybe that's because I knew we were doing this conversation. But like I've heard that, I've had that feedback of like how I like don't see people of color as readily as I see white people.
Yeah, so just noticing how you feel as you say that, like what's going on for you as you share that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know all the like flavors of shame, but I definitely feel like, oh, like I wish that weren't the case. I feel like, yeah, ashamed
Mm. Yeah, and so like is
that
there
I
like
didn't
a
even
little
know
bit of
that.
yeah, and so like is there a little bit of shame that you can tolerate around it, right? Because as white people we want to just move on, right? So it's so beautiful you paused here, even though it's so uncomfortable, I would imagine,
Right.
right? But this is actually part of the work. This is exactly what we were doing. So it's like a fractal, actually, what's happening right now in this moment, right? Which is so
Yeah.
beautiful, right? It's like this pause where, you know, we get to notice, oh, I didn't even see her. I don't remember. And because white people are trained to have a disposition and, I mean, we can go into all that, but just staying with how you're feeling,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? Like building tolerance. Yeah. You're taking a breath, you're looking around, feeling what you're feeling. And there is a lot of flavors in there, I bet.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny being in this space of being
Mm-hmm.
in the conversation in different ways, because obviously I know this is on air, but yeah, I will say part of my experience right now, and maybe, but speaking of fractal, part of what I saw there that just I'm just really appreciating the like I guess I don't know quite how to say it, but of like um okay seems like a shitty word, like it doesn't cover it, but it's something like the okayness of what's arising, and without like you said, without sort of, okay, so that means now you can like
Mm-hmm.
now we can just go on to the next thing, but there's
Yeah,
like
that's actually
a being
exactly
with.
that is exactly what we need to stop doing is going on to the next thing.
Right.
Is this is what we all have to build, especially white people, but any folks in dominant groups, right? Any with dominant identities, like, is we have to be, I mean, I think we have to, if we really want to realize this world where we're all one and equal and all that, it's, we actually have to pause in these moments of shame and disorientation and, um, you know, maybe even some feedback where we get to notice what comes up and not just keep moving and notice what it feels like to be with these, feelings, with these sensations. And, in a way that doesn't flood the system. So we just get paralyzed. Like we're not looking for shame to be able to go into a dorsal freeze, even though often it goes into that quickly,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's the reactivity to shame, right? It's like we either want to keep going this, we want to talk about it within a nervous system context. We can talk how it goes. We can go sympathetic, which is like, let me just get out of here, fight,
Mm-hmm.
flight. Like, let me either fight back, that didn't happen, or let me get out of here, and that
Mm-hmm.
can look a variety of different ways, or we can just shut down into total like dorsal shame, right? And
Yeah.
so part of our job is to build this somatic window of tolerance, right? Around, because we're all going to fuck up. Like we all are gonna not see. We're not gonna see. We're not gonna center the most marginalized people in the room because we were somatically trained to center the most privileged people in the room. So that in itself is a fractal. So it's like how to be somewhat generous when we can with each other around that, so that we don't have a disconnect right now, and your system can learn, can have a growthful experience versus just another experience where you just sort of tail between the legs. We cut this part out, because
Right.
it doesn't sound good, it doesn't look good, and you might do that, and that's, whatever. It's like all okay, but it's like, but I think if we can normalize, and I hate to use that word because normal is such a dumb word, but like if we can kind of normalize, this is
Yeah.
just maybe needs to start to be part of you know, our practice of relating, is like a moment like a moment like this or an experience like this. So I really think it's fantastic that you paused.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for being part of it. And I feel that, did I just, oh, it's just, I've been reading your stuff and lately, but I just saw an image of a presentation you were pointing at, and you mentioned these words more or less earlier. This was a quote from Stephen Porges about, like something to the extent of like healing is just something that tends to happen when we feel safe enough.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's such a, I mean, in some ways, not, we're sort of like basic and intuitive, but in some ways a pretty radically, I don't know, different than what, but it's I'm just, yeah, feeling a little wave of that
Mm-hmm.
now. Less of a, it's funny to language this stuff, right? Because it's less, and these are all my words. I'm curious your take on this, if it's different, but it's less of a doing but it's also not like, oh, you don't do anything if it's not a doing, but it's like a cultivating conditions.
Hmm.
I remember
Yeah.
being so struck by, and I don't know if you know any more about this than I do, but Nelson Mandela's forgiveness court.
No, I don't know anything. I just went and visited his grandson did this amazing exhibit on his life, and I just
Mm,
went to visit it. It's in New Zealand right now, and I got
mm,
a chance to walk through it. And it had his letters and his shoes and his shirts and his Nobel Peace Prize and his
mm-hmm,
recordings. Anyways, I just was like, I was in the whole exhibit for like a day. I was like fully immersed in one of the more inspiring people who knew
mm-hmm,
how to hold the binary of reactivity,
mm.
you know, and progress.
Will you say more about that?
Yeah, right. 'Cause so, there's this way that he inherited this country that was so in a binary, that was so in a, that was so extremely racist. It was so extremely, the white folks were in superiority. I mean, I don't know. I didn't live there, but there was just a lot of polarity, I guess is maybe
Yeah.
a better word. And I think that he's one of the global leaders that was able, through his consciousness, through his capacity, I imagine it has a lot to do with how many years he spent in prison and
Mm-hmm,
cultivated a very deep embodied knowing of freedom within himself. This is all an assumption.
mm-hmm,
Um, so that when he came out, I think um, he was able to stay connected to the all because he knew that to guide his country through this extremely turbulent time with so much historic trauma, and it's still obviously going on, that he had to hold the both and. He had to hold the perpetrators and he had to hold the victims with utmost uh, sincere relationality.
mm.
And it wasn't about, like, I don't think it was about condoning, but I think it was about a bigger, it was, it was about like caring for those places where people were really, not doing things that were okay, but being able to also hold a bigger picture um, consistently that was about the we.
Mm.
And I think that, and it's not that sometimes we say, hey, that wasn't okay, right?
Sure.
Like when somebody does something, it's like, that's very true. We look around all the time, like there's a lot of shit going on that's not okay. But how do we do that simultaneously and continue to hold the we? And are we able to have some versatility around not just staying stuck in the polarity of right and wrong, shame and grief and guilt and anger and rage? It's like those are all super important fuel. It's like both and. It's like all of those, and
Mm.
how do we how do we grow together versus how do we, you know versus just staying stuck in the corners. And again, being in the corners of our own little communities is necessary sometimes. So it's like, but it's like a nervous system and a heart and a being and a body that can really tolerate and um, come to really be able to live from a both and place, right? And that's really different.
Yeah, I really appreciate how you're languaging this, um, how you're languaging this right now. Feels really resonant to me, and I like in so many forms that like interest in maybe collective interest in moving. I don't know what the word is, beyond or something. The binary. I almost always hear that in relation to like sexuality or gender. Um, but yeah, I like that you're bringing in that same kind of lens into this because that feels really right on. And it's so it's funny I say it's so tricky to language, even though I feel like you just languaged it beautifully, but it sure doesn't lend itself to sound bites. And if it does, maybe those are the quotes that we pull and we go like, yeah, something about this, like whatever that is, that verbatim quote of like, don't try to help me if you think you need to help me or da 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 da. But that line, but if you see that we're
That your liberation is
hopelessly
bound up with mine.
right.
If you see that your liberation is bound with mine, then let us work together.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a quote from Aboriginal activist in Australia.
Right.
I remember her name off the top of my head. But yeah, no, it is the we. And it's not always going to be the we. And I think it's like it's beyond binary, but before we get beyond binary, we actually have to embody. Um, I think this is where the word, this is where the notion of trauma comes in, because there's so much that has not been processed yet. There's so much intergenerational and historic trauma that is plaguing us collectively, right? Like that's, the United States, for example, we're not even, interested at all for the most part. And I mean, the United States is an institution in addressing the genocide of Native Americans.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we do see that there's going to be a Senate hearing soon on reparations for slavery, which is incredible, right? So that's like I mean, not little, could be like a really big thing, and a very necessary thing. So there's a way that, part of the binary gets created because people have been very authentically victimized. And so there's got to be repair. There's got to be, right? We talking like attachment stuff. It's like, okay, you attune and you repair, right? But we need to think about that collectively, right? We watch all these therapists walk around now. They're like crazy about trauma healing, right? And it's awesome. And it's so important. We're learning so much about the neurobiology of attachment and, what children and what people need to do to heal. And I think everything that we're doing, we need to, as practitioners, we need to be looking, and what's the collective application here? Because there's so much around what would it mean if we really deeply repaired everything that white folks took away from and, victimized and perpetrated. And, like there's just a lot to be tended to. And we, of course, we get so overwhelmed by that so quick. That can easily put us into, again, a freeze, like a dorsal, like, paralysis, it's too much. But what's exciting is that there's so much consciousness coming in. There's so many people that are getting trained in some sort of trauma healing, schools and practitioners and things like that. So we are building new capacities right now, both individually as practitioners and also collectively in some institutions where sometimes new things are getting to happen, right? So example of that is when we shift from sending kids instead of detention, we send them to meditation and yoga, right? Because we really know that detention is usually for kids who have the disorganized nervous systems, who are acting out because of whatever they're enduring, whether it's at home or at school, right? Like, and so to be able to, instead of punitive measures, we're thinking about collective resourcing measures, which can give more of the kids, the holding, the support, and the witness that they deserve and that they've always deserved. And it's part of why, they're acting out, because they haven't gotten it. So there's just, it is a very, I mean, it's such a, I don't even know what word to use. It's such a fascinating, and I don't mean it in like anyways, I'm just going to use the word fascinating. I'm going to commit to that word. Fascinating time field, because, and it's easy I guess fascinating is easy because I'm a white person. And so I'm not, because I have so much privilege. And so I'm focused. I'm a white person who has, who's like lower middle class. And so I have enough to care for my basic needs, so I can call it fascinating. If I didn't have that, I'm sure I wouldn't call it fascinating, but anyways, but from a community neurobiological standpoint, it's a really powerful time, because there's just really some, what you got to witness at the conference, it was super imperfect. It was super messy. We did a good job. We steered the ship with hundreds of people trying to address a racial, massive misattunement. That was like the typical setup. And it's like, we're seeing more and more of these things happen. Now, there's a lot more that needs to happen, right? So, but it is through this work in some of the nitty gritty building of tolerance to stay in the room for these conversations and to grow from them. That's actually how we get beyond the binary, right? We can't get beyond it, or we can't realize our we-ness, like our all-togetherness, until we really do the nitty gritty work in the body and in the heart of reconciling and reckoning all of the misattunements. I mean, maybe not all of them, but the collective misattunements that have happened, and I think there's just more and more people that are like, they're in, we're like,
Mm-hmm.
how can I do this? How can I practice? How can I? And I think we've seen a lot of that organizing after Trump got elected too. It's
Mm-hmm.
not just in the healing realms. It's like, it's in
Mm-hmm.
city councils. It's like we've seen more women run than ever. It's like we're shifting power. So,
Yeah.
lots to talk about with that, but I'll pause there because I know I just talked a lot.
That's great. No, I love it. Can you do a little retuck too?
Yeah, sure.
Um, yeah, I appreciate you bringing in those examples. I had not thought of or heard of, but yeah, that yoga and meditation as a detention. That seems like such a beautiful example of, I guess, when I think about, okay, all this collective trauma, what do we do about it? I kind of, the only thing I can think of a lot of times is like, I guess you sit down in a room and you talk about it. And that, maybe as wonderful as that can be, it can also be, I'm just using my intuition here to say it can be limited. So I don't know, just right now hearing you, I'm sort of looking around thinking like, oh, right, I think the trip is, for me, they're so, I would never think to question detention, because that's what happens when you F up in school. You go to detention, right? There's all these assumptions, and even the wanting to dissociate or get the hell out of there during an intense conversation, it makes so much sense. Like, of course I'm not being sympathetically charged because something legit is happening that I need to look at. No, this is just stupid. This is bullshit. I need to get out of here. It's these like bedrock assumptions that I don't even know are assumptions until like some miracle, or it really feels like that sometimes, of like, oh my God, I was like so sure about my rightness. And
Hmm.
it's so sure I didn't even go around thinking I'm right. It's just like, of course, it's just the way it is. And those people are not getting it, and I'm getting it, and me and my friends get it. And until
Hmm.
like something will happen to sort of shift that a little bit. And it does feel like a grace where it's like, holy shit.
Hmm.
I'm in fact very actively unsure. And I'm speaking in vague terms, but it just happens I mean, yeah, those intense conversations sometimes, or yeah, like I'm sure there's way more structural examples that I'm not aware of than ones that I am, of like, of course, it's just the way the world is. And
Hmm.
then things start to shift a little bit, and I don't know if there's
Yeah,
like,
no, I'm really glad that you've sort of named this because it really speaks to this piece that is part of why it's so hard to change. First of all, we don't see it, right? Because especially if the more in the dominant identities we are, that structures have been built for to privilege, the less we will see how things are running. Because if we're benefiting from it all the time, right, as white people, why would we see it? We're like, this is just the way it is. This is, and I feel certain about it. I love that you use the word like sure about it. It's like,
mm-hmm,
of course it's going to, if it reinforces that sense of certainty, which of course we know that our body and our nervous system, that's ideal, is to feel, I mean, it's not really ideal, but I think that sense of homeostasis and safety is like, who doesn't, nobody, people don't want to feel disrupted every day and feel unsafe. And so there's just this like, once you have a sense of certainty that serves you, we're sort of wired to protect that, because certainty, especially when it comes to resource and how we see the world, equals survival, equals like, this is my world, it's working for me, let's keep it how it is, let's keep it in homeostasis,
mm-hmm,
you know and so when we have something that comes along that disrupts it, or people, places, and things that start to disrupt that around, hey, like our privileges as white people is actually creating, so much suffering for other people. And then even though rationally we might say, oh my God, like, we don't want that. Like,
exactly,
I
exactly,
don't want that, right? We might say, right. So this is like, you get in a room of people, and people say, we're all one though, and we don't want that. But here's the tricky part: is that because we've been conditioned, because our bodies have been conditioned as white people, it means we've internalized something called white supremacy, which means that like we've literally internalized into our mind and our bodies this notion of that we're a bit better. We're a bit better than and we deserve. And so while our mind might know better, while our mind might say, no, 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 of course we know it's all equal, our bodies actually will continue to act out of a place that we were wired for, which is to protect our privilege. And this is really tricky, right? It's tricky. Like, yeah. It's really tricky because a lot of it, when we talk about the wiring of our nervous system and the beliefs that got wired in there, and I'm using white people just because you and I share that. I'm making an assumption that we share that.
Yeah.
Is that, when that gets wired into our nervous system, which is all about protecting our safety and survival, it's unconscious, right? Like that's a word we need to use. Like it gets internalized in an unconscious way. And so it gets acted out in an unconscious way, which is a really difficult thing to work with because our brain might be like, we're going to go and do this, but our bodies might be strategizing in a different way, right? And so as people in dominant identities, we actually have to learn to explore almost like this incongruency that we are living with, right? Because we can, again, we have our mental perspective, and obviously not all. Some people are like, no, super racist mentally too. So it's like then it's super congruent. But there's a lot of well-meaning white folks, right, including myself, that want a different world, but then my body's response to that, how much am I willing to take action? How far am I willing to go? How far am I willing to put myself on the line? What conversations with my white colleagues am I willing to interrupt, right? How much am I willing to call out? How much am I willing to put my own reputation at risk, right? Like these are like my body has like contractive, sort of reactions when every time I step out to interrupt white supremacy, interrupt racism, because there's a part of me, my body in particular, that's like, stay safe, like just put your head down, keep going, like it's just going to be easier if you don't do that thing, right? And it probably will be easier if I don't do that thing, because when I put myself out there talking about race in my somatic experiencing community, negative things come, like I get treated differently. I get treated as the rebel and the maverick and the outspoken one, and I'm labeled, and I'm even more marginalized. And that's not totally, that's just an example, but that's in every white healing community. So I'm not going to just say that's just SE. So again, like holding the complexity of, the somatic experience of unpacking privilege is, it's a calling, and it's not like a one-time thing, and it's not even a workshop thing, it's a practice. And it involves understanding. It involves undoing a lot of what we've learned, right? Because white supremacy is actually it's cultural norms that we internalized and then got set into our body. And then we have to figure out then what it's like even one thing around the detention to meditation, you're like, wow, and think it's probably like a million things like that.
It's probably a million things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And and I love this word from somatic experiencing, how do we titrate, which just means take a little piece of this that we're talking about and really work it in a way where we can integrate a new aspect of somatic consciousness, which just means like we get a little more free around our minds and our bodies, and we metabolize some of our own supremacy, and we create some new capacity to do things a little bit different that really do serve the whole, and even reconcile and reckon with some of the history that, maybe our ancestors have been a part of. It's kind of it's like a tall order. And I know I feel like it's always sounds so overwhelming, and it kind of is, but I actually think it's the most exciting work to be doing on the planet today. Because if we really want to do something different, we really want to see this like different world, we actually need to evolve our nervous systems, and we need to evolve our consciousness in our bodies so that how we are together is a different flavor and quality of freedom than you and I have ever experienced,
Hmm.
because we're talking about unlearning a whole lot of stuff.
Right. And do you, I mean, maybe difficult to sum up such a deep process. I love what you just said, or kind of posed that question or invitation of like an actual, not just like change, rearrange the chairs, but like, okay, evolution. What's that like? What's that like?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just getting this image of hearing you, both the parts that are like, I am going to do something. I am going to step in here. Like I'm going to, and if you do or you don't, right. But still like that invitation. And also there's an invitation of like, you listen to what arises in your body, where there's not a like, oh, I feel shame or I feel bad about this, so here's what I'm going to do about that. It's like, nope, listen, digest, be with, um, and I don't know. I don't want to make it too like cerebral, like places you do this and places you do that, but it seems like what you're speaking to has a strong kind of dose of both of those, both a doing and a being, a noticing what's there in a way where you can't do shit about it. It's what's there, and that noticing might be the metabolic agent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. No, I love that. I think it's absolutely, that's where we start, is well, first of all, before we start noticing, we have to practice raising our consciousness, right? We have to practice, we have to understand what it is that we've learned unconsciously. So we have to raise our consciousness by reading you know, uh, resources from folks on the margins. We have to understand how racism works. We have to understand how sexism works. We have to understand how capitalism works. We don't have to totally understand it, but getting the gist of it, and I'm sure some people would say you do have to understand it, but I think if you get the gist of how things have been organized, you can really start to wake up your consciousness so that you can look around and start to have a healthy critique, a healthy lens that's like, oh, this is how things are set up. And not only will we see that things weren't set up for marginalized identities like the people on the margins, but we'll actually start to see, if we hang in it long enough, that they actually weren't really set up for us either. They were set up for us to accumulate resources and security. So there is and of course that feeds our certainty and our power, right? So they were set up for, structurally for a certain type of people, white, upper class, male, landowning, things like that. But the truth is that if we want to get down to like the autonomy of you and me, like of our deep indigenous, sort of bodies, which we all come from indigenous cultures at some point before we were all colonized, like it actually, all of these structures actually don't serve the people in power either. Because if we, they do, I mean, I want to say they do serve it, but they also really are taking away, um, really creating disconnection with people's organic selves, right? It's sort of saying, this is how you act if you're male. This is how you act if you're upper class. This is how you act if you're born into this, right? There's all these customs and roles and things like that. And then you go and replicate it, And so that's actually not set up for each of those people either to really have a true experience in their life. So, there's the massive impact on marginalized people, but then there's also everybody's life gets hijacked by white supremacy and capitalism. Like it's not like it's like either or. There's a lot of, it's not rocket science why we're struggling with anxiety and depression and more people are on pharmaceuticals than ever, like because like there's a lostness. Like the white culture isn't grounded in anything. It's not grounded in the earth. It's not grounded in community. It's grounded in money, and it's grounded in power. And it's like, how do we as white people in our bodies hold the complexity of that? Because we're benefiting from it. And yet our deeper indigenous selves, which go back many generations, if we go back far enough, we've lost a connection to where we've come from, and that is part of our job in this. It's not just to like create equality and create transformation. It's like to create a deeper connection with a sovereignty of self and community that is, we have been, slowly more and more disconnecting from, and getting all these, and getting all the reward of it. So, but the suffering is just getting bigger, right? So that's the consequence. And I think we look at a lot of white people wandering around being like, I'm not fulfilled. I don't have any meaning in my life. I don't know what to do. I'm so depressed. And it's like, well, it's not just about creating social change. It's about doing the deeper work of how do we go in and unlearn so much of what's been kind of like or running our lives around like what is important and what is worthwhile to do and who we really are,
Right. Right. Yeah. Thank you. And I wonder, yeah, right, how we'll look back on this, if at all, in 100 years or more of, I mean, I like, I'm just thinking about all this right now, but, you use the word, again, evolve, has a different image than like go back to, I feel, and who knows, right? It can get probably tricky to language any of this, but I wonder if there's sort of been an opening that won't close back down through what we're calling sort of capitalism and global, like I don't even know how to word it, but there's a kind of integration, like shit got blown to pieces in some ways, and it's like, okay, that was something you said during the workshop that I took with you, where I was one of the participants for this little mock-up where you pointed to, this was, I don't even remember like how you were identifying who, but we're saying basically if you go through a lot of hard stuff, one of the byproducts can be a real deep resilience. And you were asking, I think I was the practitioner, the quote practitioner in this, and I was sort of, can I feel that? And that was one of those obvious things that I was like, oh my God, I've never like thought of this. It was very powerful and very emotional for me to look at somebody who I'd be like, oh, like you probably have had a harder life than I have, and as a like short woman of color, and like this world is not made for you, and to tune into that aspect of that resilience. So I mean that can stand on its own. If you have anything more to say about that, and B, I'm just kind of feeling that aspect maybe as applied to all these very anxious, depressed people, going around. There's this movement of let's remember our roots, and a kind of like, you maybe been, there's been something building in this heat that is like might really be of service at some point. You know what I mean?
That's right. It's no, I totally agree with you. And I mean, I'm pretty sure that if there's, one of the benefits, interestingly enough, and maybe it's a dumb, I'm not even sure if I want to use the word, but one of the, let me just slow down. One of the impacts, or one of the things that oppression has created, is that no matter what, it creates resilience. Mm-hmm. And it creates a much more intense heat, as you say, and a much bigger capacity to have to be creative, to have to be savvy, to have to learn the somatic hustle of how to survive in this world, whether it's from you're getting profiled all the time, or you're structurally, exploited or marginalized. It's like when someone endures oppression in a daily way, multi-systemic, right? Not only in their community or in their schools, but in their workplace, or in the, within the context of government. It's like, which pretty much just says like, you're never safe. Like chronic social trauma is like, you're never safe. We're talking about trauma a lot these days, but we're just talking about like, oh, it's like a car accident or this or that. It's like, no. We need to learn how to talk about chronic social trauma, where if you're in a brown or a black body, I imagine there's not a lot of times you feel safe, at least in this country, the United States. As a trans person, I mean, I hustle every day around like hostility in public places, and there's lots of layers of that. And so I mean, there's part of me that's never been able to let down for a long period of time, because going into a public place, it's like, there's always somebody who's staring at you, laughing at you, making fun of you, moving away from you, uncomfortable. The kids are like going crazy because they don't know what to do because they've never been around somebody who's non-binary before. Um, and so the endurance that people on the margin, and that's just like a small example, and people, obviously trans people of color, it's like, there's so many more layers, but um, the endurance that is necessary to survive in this soup, in this like massively toxic soup that basically just wants you to go away so you don't disrupt the status quo. You stop interrupting the collective nervous system status quo. It's like the endurance is so beyond what most people can imagine. And so in that endurance, if people survive, first of all, that's only if people, like a lot of people die, right? Because it's too much to endure. People kill themselves. People are, completely in addiction, which is amazing, management strategy to try to just endure. If you survive and you find your way through some of this, and you're able to live some of a life that has a semblance of authenticity in it, it's like, the capacity which that means that you have is beyond what most people can understand. Because what it means is that you have figured out how to survive, and you've also figured out maybe how to create a little bit of life for yourself where there's a little bit of freedom. And that type of intelligence, that is evolution. Whether we, whatever you have to say, it's like even though it still might be a shit life, you're here, you have some things. It's like it's not a good life. I'm not saying like this is so great evolution, but what I'm talking about is the quality of strength, intelligence, capacity, creativity, mastery that goes into enduring day-to-day oppression. is neurological like mastery. And we need to be looking at communities on the margins and people on the margins, and like these communities are like the folks who like know how to do both, and because they have to do it every day. You have to sort of save yourself while living in a greater context that is saying like you're not okay. And so there's not a lot that's more both and than that. Like that's real. That's like edgy and real. And so, to me, I think that is so much of, and I think, most people have got to go through that in a certain way. It's like the things that nobody wants to be excluded, and so we do all these things to not feel that. But the folks who can't get away from being excluded, it's like you have to figure it out. And it's about enduring incredible suffering, incredible sadness, hopelessness, unprocessed rage, despair, and also great joy for what you're able to cobble, for in your community and for your home and for your life. And, so it's like both and I don't want to speak for all oppressed people. And I'm sorry if I just want to say, like, I'm sorry if it sounds like that. That's not what I mean. But I am exploring like more, sort of thematic pieces around how do we create conditions for collective liberation, and how are folks on the margins like absolutely leading humanity in this type of evolution. That's what I'm talking about. So just to be clear.
Yeah, no, I get that from what you're saying. And I mean, I think one of your gifts, I don't know you that well, but just over this last hour is, it seems like an aspect of this. The word story can seem so sort of trite, but I see you as a sort of storyteller, among a generation of storytellers. But it's almost like it's like nothing different is happening. I think that's the thing, right? It's not like, oh, you actually didn't see this whole thing. It's like the scene is still the same, but as a storyteller, you can tell the story from a different protagonist, or you can, reorient the audience, and it's like, oh shit. At least that's what I'm feeling. And people may agree or not agree, right? But in this case, I mean, I feel a huge resonance with that. That's like, oh, right. And almost like something in my heart relaxes where like, oh, because I kind of of course this is true, that it's almost like, I think that is a quote from Einstein of like, you can't solve a problem with the same consciousness it was created in. I don't know whether to call it white this or that. I'll just talk to my own experience. There will be a feeling of it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming to the extent that like, I better figure out what to do about all of this, and part of what I hear you offering is like a shift in protagonist story where it's not like, okay, you get to go back to sleep or whatever. You're still, you being me, are still in it. And check it out. You're dancing with everybody else and they're not waiting for you to save them, right? There's this real strength that we can like lean into each other with, and maybe in a different way. Maybe the leaning looks really different than you've ever leaned before, but there's you don't need to generate everything. It's like it's more about seeing what's here that I missed than needing to create something.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think that's well said. It's especially for folks in the more dominant. It's like my job is just to keep paying attention to all the ways this shows up in me, like dominant behaviors, right? And that are unconscious, and is to have enough space in my body and my life to be able to be with them, to tolerate my reaction to them, and then to metabolize them. Because every time I metabolize and work on metabolizing an old belief that may be rooted in, 400 years ago or 700 years ago, every time I work and metabolize that through my body, that when I get to looking around after I've done that work, life's going to look different. Every time you metabolize one of those old beliefs that are about us and them, they're about superiority and inferiority, that are about I need more and you get less. It's like if we metabolize it and our nervous system becomes more, what word do I want to use? More free, in those ways. It's like then I walk down the street and literally things will look different. I feel a little bit safer. I don't feel as worried about whatever that person or my, how much money I have. And what if I wasn't worrying about all those things? Who would I be? I'd be different. I don't, some of me doesn't know how I'd be. And some of me knows I'd probably be happier. And I'd have probably more opportunity to connect in more authentic ways, versus, staying stuck in fear. So, and it's not, the path isn't for everybody, and yet it is for everybody. Like no one.
I love that kind of being on its own, but what do you mean?
Yeah, we'll do that. Yeah. No, that's good. I think we'll leave that one.
Okay, yeah, that'll be a little koan for
Exactly.
me to listen to several times and be like, oh yeah. Sage says, come back when I'm ready for the next one.
I don't mean it like
in
that.
7 years. I'm sorry. I don't mean to make fun of it. I mean it because I feel that. There's a sense of sometimes you hear something and it's like, I kind of get that, but there's something, I don't know, sometimes words go like little seeds and they take some time to germinate.
I will say something more about that, actually. I want to say what I said was this path isn't for everybody, and yet it is for everybody. And what I mean by that is that nobody gets left out. I mean, I mean a lot of things by it, but in that it's a matter of time. It's just a matter of time, because I believe our deepest compasses are oriented toward evolution, connection. I don't want to say peace, because I think, I just think that everybody is included in this journey if it's so inspiring to them, and it's because I think there's a way that we want to both feel safe and we want to feel free.
And part of what's going on, right?
Right. And we can't feel part of something if we don't feel safe enough. And
right.
and that there's so much exclusion going on, and then so much reaction to that. It's like, It's like, what if collectively we could feel safe and free?
Right.
And that we were working on behalf of each other for that.
Yeah.
And the planet, of course. We haven't talked about the planet at all, but, that's got to be, obviously, because we come from this planet. So it's like
Right.
we.
It seems like the potential, upside of that, like if someone comes in as a bodywork client and is like, I have 12 different pain things, but it's sort of like good news, bad news of that they could really all be connected.
Oh, yeah.
Bad news that there's 12 things. I at least feel that. And with this sort of, I don't know, follow any of these threads deep enough, and there we are with everything else.
Yeah. And I love that you just brought it back to body work, right? Because we're both body workers. So it's like 12 different pain things, right? This is where it's perfect that it's both and. It's like, yeah, let's tend to those. And we'll start with one. And we'll see what happens. And let's notice where it feels right to start, right? Maybe it's your shoulder, maybe it's your foot, or maybe it's your head. It's like, let's find a doorway that feels manageable, right? Right. And simultaneously as a practitioner, so we're going to get focused on one or two, and simultaneously as a practitioner, I'm going to hold the whole in my consciousness, because I know that the whole being and what's going on in their life and all these other choices that they, the job that they're in that they hate, and, the thing that happened at, 12 years old, the loss that happened. It's like, those are all likely connected to the pain. So I'm going to hold the whole and the context of the person in my consciousness so that I can be available for any important information that this, body wants to tell me, that maybe isn't so much about the shoulder pain, but is maybe a little bit about like the support that wasn't there when they were 12 and they lost their mom. Like the support wasn't on their shoulder, right? That wasn't available to them. And sometimes we just get a sense of that as body workers, And so it's listening on the physical realm, it's listening on the energetic realm. And I think it's a perfect parallel to like what we have to do, which is like listening to the pain and tending to it while continuing to hold the whole, because we don't want to miss what's going on, in the whole picture, because there's lots of things happening, and to be able to learn what to pay attention to not get flooded, and to do that, it's a bit of a calling and an art, I think. And I think that's why people meditate. That's why people practice. That's why, I think we all have our ways that we do that. But
yeah.
Yeah,
I like that you use that word. That's come into my mind several times for sort of what we're, not just what we're talking about, or I'll say you. Yeah, I feel like what you're presenting, it's, these things that can seem so cognitively disparate. Well, do I do this or do I do that? And okay, both and I think I get it, right? But this sort of, I don't know, art has so much more of a verb-like quality to it, where there's sort of the reckoning is the thing.
yeah, totally.
Yeah. Boy, this has sure been really lovely. Yeah,
Totally.
I appreciate I appreciate you, and I appreciate our conversation very much. I look forward to both getting it out there and honestly listening back on it. I usually get something different when I'm not in the middle of the conversation.
Yeah, maybe we could, just before we end, like, I just want to touch in with you. It's like we had a, like mid conversation, there was like, we had some piece come up, and I just wanted to see if we both wanted to just check in about that. Like, how are we feeling, and, like, how you doing around it? And I'm happy to share,
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And you mean the piece where I like forgot you had been or didn't see or whatever.
Your feelings that
That
came,
thing.
like your sensations that came
Yeah.
up. Yeah. How you doing now?
Um I'm good. I mean I remember immediately, like right when we were in the midst of that process, like some tears were coming up. My heart relaxed a lot. Yeah, I feel a little, I don't know quite how I describe it, but kind of wide-minded in a sense of like, okay, I don't know if everything's going to come in for a landing or not. And I
Mm-hmm.
think naming that now is there's a little like relaxedness around trying to. So you're saying in summary, okay, sage haze, everybody. Stay tuned next,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You said a wide
Mm-hmm.
mind. Yeah, nice.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
And yeah, I mean, even just you asking and talking about this a little bit feels um, embodied, if you will. Like I
Great.
feel a little more just okay back in this, or just right here in the room with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's great.
How about you?
Yeah. It's great. I appreciate you being willing to do this because it helps me kind of land too.
Cool.
I feel like when I kind of like start going, I kind of go up,
Right.
And so I just feel like I'm just kind of coming back down. I wanted to just like check back in a little more relationally with you, and that feels really great. And just appreciating you and your platform that you're inviting folks in to, co-create, education and authentic sharing.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to have free education, really, which I love. That's part of why I love podcasts. It's
Yeah.
like there's access for
Yeah.
so many people to be able to raise this type of consciousness we're talking about, and
Yeah.
to be able to have your own personal experience with it wherever you're at, and to hang out with it and see how it integrates. So yeah, I'm just like really appreciating you, and I love the name of your podcast, Body Awake. And it would be my hope that our conversation today really supports people in their own journeys around body awakeness and planet awakeness. And it's just always a joy to talk with another colleague who is so thoughtful and curious and willing and brave to stop in the middle and do a bit of an uncomfortable piece. So I just really appreciate that, Liam.
Thank you, Sage. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, your prayer is my prayer too. That this
Mm-hmm.
is, however you say it, part of. But and yeah, I love it's I don't know a way to quite encapsulate it, but I feel from you both directly and sort of a wide invitation of
Mm-hmm.
I guess I don't know quite how to say it, but of like, again, let's go back to both but of like being able to be not just being able to, but like being bold, like, don't tolerate bullshit. Like we got to do this. Like that's messed up. That kind of strength and the whatever it takes, that like deep alchemy of like being with other people when we're deeply uncomfortable, and if I guess I like that you point to too, because I feel like it makes it much more human and real, that there's a window of tolerance for that, and sometimes like you might just be blown out of the water,
Yep.
or you're gone for whatever reason, but almost as much as possible, and really paying heed to these tools, like the work that you're doing through your somatic experiencing and body work, or the many ways it can come, like treat these like important tools, because they are not necessarily for what they are, but for what they create space for. Because like,
Mm-hmm.
oh my God, this is just riffing for a second, but like watching any of the congressional hearings about anything, feel like, wow, like you can just see that 8-year-olds on the playground, with that same like consternation and red-faced and frustrated. And of course, there's some phenomenal people in Congress right now, and hopefully more and more too. So I really need to check myself to not sort of belittle like, oh, the stupid people running our country. We're all like playing our part, but just that capacity for not just uncomfortableness, but like deep disagreement, or like, I think what you're saying is crazy, and there's this like alchemy happening in my bones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think it's definitely one place we can look where people are in a polarity around
Mm-hmm.
right and wrong, and it just gets acted out in all these ways.
Mm-hmm.
And as you were talking, I had this like last piece, this final
Yeah.
piece I come in around, like, and that when we develop capacity to be in the reactivity and the wholeness, then somehow, even in the reactivity, if we can stay with the both and, like the both and reactivity or whatever our reaction is, and the whole, then usually at least a little bit love can stay present in it. And it doesn't have to, it can be messy, it can still be all the things, and it can still kind of devolve into obliteration. But if we can build enough capacity for a little bit of love and compassion to stay present, then I think that's the type of both and that I'm talking about.
The invitation for evolution.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see what this one ends up being called, but that's a contender for the title
Yeah,
with
I
AJ's.
like
Yeah.
Love it. Thank you.
Is there? I want to definitely open up a space for if people want to do some of your trainings or know more of you. I'll definitely link to your website, Embodied Liberation.
Great.
Would you point people in any other direction or anything coming up, maybe this fall or winter, that you'd want people to know about?
No, I don't have. I wish I did say I had all these things going on, but I'm actually kind of taking a little bit of downtime this summer and regrouping a little bit. There's just so many things to do now, and just trying to figure out which ones are trying to listen in that way that we were talking about to like which
Yes.
one's most compelling. But in the meantime, I will say, don't, you can look at my website and see what's going on, but there's a lot of great folks of color that are doing great embodiment work and collective healing work right now. And I would be pointing you to those websites. There's an Instagram account that's amazing called Decolonizing Therapy.
I'm just
There's,
going to take a little notes.
yeah, for sure. There's Sonia Renee's The Body Is Not an Apology, and she's running some classes. There's Tada Hazumi, I'm sorry if I messed up your name, that's running some important classes on their website, theselfishactivist.com. Oh yeah, there's the White Supremacy and Me workbook, which is an amazing exploration you can do in community. So these are all tools that you can start to do some of this unpacking somatics, in your body, and look to the margins for education. Don't go to the typical things. It's like,
Yeah.
talk to folks and really kind of look to the folks that are under resourced but are doing some of the most important work.
Can I say too? I want to add on to that and do it, on air, because I want to know if you have an orientation to this. But I'll say my experience, and I guess it depends on who. Certainly, I've done a lot, but with a lot of like anti-racism material, it was like very. I didn't know this at the time, how sort of difficult it was to like really digest. It felt. I was amazed in retrospect at how sort of foreign it felt, or like, okay, yep, I get it, but there was a big degree of sort of, okay, this is something else I've got to do to like, I don't know, to be like, to be okay in the world but anyway, in contrast to doing something in a group of people that felt really like authentically safe and supportive. And I know that's a lot more of an ask. I'm just thinking about people listening, but like the workshops I've done, the in-person workshops I've had, and I know those aren't as accessible for everybody, but even just like, I haven't done this, but I can imagine like looking at some of that material with like a group of friends who are authentically,
Exactly.
kind to one another, and like, look,
Yeah.
we're not trying to get each other who's the most social justice savvy. Like, let's just be fucking real and
Yeah.
honest with what I can just imagine that being much more worth it, even if you did a tenth of the material with a group of people, maybe
Yeah.
having a lot more impact.
Absolutely. I think that's I mean, again, that kind of speaks to the window of tolerance and like
Mm-hmm.
what's going to get people into the room and keep people in the room in a growthful way, around this type of learning. And it is really uncomfortable because, again, it triggers our threat response. And so if it means getting together with a group of friends and working through a piece, that's amazing, because then you build that you're starting to build a cultural capacity there. So it's even more powerful to do it with your community, actually. So I
Yeah.
love that you brought that in. And then the only other thing I would say is if you're using a resource, like a book or something, like make sure just to make a donation from your group to, the author or the community that they represent, just as a way to, again, continue to shift resources to the folks who are generating this material that, hopefully your group's getting a lot out of. But I think that's a really smart recommendation. Hmm.
Yeah. One that I would like to, I'll make a little on-air commitment. Yeah, I'd like to head that
Great.
myself
I'll
too.
check in with
I
you
hadn't
about
quite realized the info. Okay, I knew you'd say that. No, that's great.
that.
That's great. Because I feel that. In fact, yeah, I know we're wrapping up, and I keep saying this in different ways, but it's true. Like this conversation for me, just is really pointing to that, not just theoretically, but like I feel that. It's just nice to be in like a kinship, and I've been a very like social guy my whole life in so many ways, and also I think there's deep alonenesses in my heart that's kept the world at bay, in so many ways. And so some material can come in and either reinforce that or be an invitation to not just me feeling better, but it's like a kind of open-hearted way of relating that is, yeah, it can be that too.
Yeah, and that in itself is just like another great tangent of a conversation, not that we'll get into, but that, as teachers and facilitators, it's like that the say we, because I feel like it's like you and I probably resonate with this, like that we're on is like how do you hold collective capacity for really charged material and not have it devolve into, fight, flight, and freeze?
Right.
How do you create conditions for growthful collective, you know, liberation and healing and things like that in groups? And it sounds like you've had some experiences where it's been the opposite and it feels like it's, I mean, tons of people say, I don't want to do that because I don't want to be wrong and I don't want to get it wrong. I don't want to be, seen as this. I feel really afraid. And it's like, right, that totally makes sense. And that's like window of tolerance limitation and maybe a little bit of fear around
Mm-hmm.
like being uncomfortable. I'm not saying that's, I'm just saying like,
Mm-hmm.
and so how do we, know how to both push people a little bit, but also be creating environments where there is more heart and compassion while holding maybe a fierceness around some of the work, but that it doesn't feel like a fierceness that's exclusive or that's pathologizing or that's like people, can't stay in the room for,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because there's gotta be space for both these days.
Mm-hmm. Right. Which is a kind of a beautiful full circle again, because the question you asked about how do we hold these conversations, that was my first question for you. In some ways, like I remember you
Mm-hmm.
and somebody else leading
Mm-hmm.
that. Well, I can't say I remember that. I remember you leading
Mm-hmm.
that, facilitating that conversation, and having that question of, and I guess I'm getting as much as it could be a tidy answer, both. You do the work to continue to build capacity in yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and you be willing to take risks that you can take that aren't tolerable, but it's not like don't wait until you're perfect. Oh yes, I know everything that's going to come up. I have the answer for it. It's like, sounds like you were, and I think you even said something on stage. One of the first things you said was about being nervous, and we all like smiled and laughed because we're like, oh Jesus, thank God, because like we are too. We're all
Mm-hmm.
so nervous too.
Yeah.
To like
Yeah.
not just acknowledge that, but almost, I don't want to say capitalize, sounds like such a cunning strategy, but there's something about how it's not just okay. It's like, oh, thank God, like that the facilitator is with us and can be sort of bold enough to not just be in their own process all the time, but like, let's do this. Let's do this.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Let's do this. Yep.
Let's do this
Yep.
with Sage Hayes. Okay. We got a few good working titles.
Agreed. Agreed. Mm-hmm.
All right, my friend. Thank you so much
You're welcome.
for
Yeah,
your
look forward to it coming out. And thank you so much. Great to see your face. And I
same.
know folks won't see our faces, but